All right, so I can do intro. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Unhinged, I should say, even though I'm not unhinged. Uh, it is time for a long awaited debate between Anthony, also known as Political Unhinged, and Chase, two members of our Discord server here on the Conservative Patriots of TikTok. I will be hosting this debate, and here's how this debate will work. To the audience in here, it looks like all of you are already muted, so good to go. You guys know what to do. The two debaters, you guys will be muted while the other one goes. How this format will work is that we'll start with an introduction. The introduction will be actually, let me ask you guys, how long do you guys want it to be? Do you guys want it to be 3 or 2 minutes or even longer?
Two. I'll do two.
Want to do 2 for introduction? I was thinking 3, but Chase said 2, so I guess we'll do 2 for introduction. So it'll be a 2-minute introduction, and then rebuttals we do in 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2-minute introduction, 3-minute rebuttals. The amount of rebuttals we'll have will actually depend on we're just going to go with the flow. We're not going to set a number, but I would say probably at least 5. But we're not going to set a number, though. It'll just go until we feel like going to the last round, which is the questionnaire. People in the audience, along with me, the moderator, will ask the debaters questions. Potentially, you have a question for both the debaters or just one of them. Doesn't matter. But nonetheless, we're going to get to this. So who would like to go first, Chase or Anthony? Anthony, to start off, is debating against, I should say. I should say Chase is the affirmative. He is debating in favor of banning transgender firearm ownership, whereas Anthony is debating against such. Anthony is also saying that this proposal is unconstitutional. Chase is saying that it is constitutional. So, which one of you would like to go first?
I can go.
Okay, all right, Chase. Whenever you start speaking, I will give you 2 minutes to go.
Okay. So, in this debate, I'll be laying out my case for why I think that not only a transgender gun ban would be good, but is also constitutional within the bounds and limits set by the Constitution. Restricting firearm access to transgender individuals can reduce school shootings massively. Especially in recent years, we've seen an uprising in school shootings. Not only that, transgender individuals have a clear mental health issue that is beyond many other conditions that would disqualify you from firearm ownership. For example, if you're on depression medication, you cannot own a firearm. This should be the same for if you're on gender-altering hormones, because we've seen there's drastic health effects that these hormones can have on people, especially over time. In recent years, we've seen an uptick of transgender shootings to an extent we've never seen before. Not only that, but also transgender community has a roughly 48% attempted suicide rate, which is not normal. The normal rate is around 4%. This shows that there's some clear cognitive and mental health issues here that would be able to constitutionally restrict firearm ownership to these people. Thank you.
Okay, Chase, you only used about 1 minute and 10 seconds of your time, so you had plenty of time remaining. Anthony,
Yeah, I didn't want a long opening.
Yeah, that's fine. Anthony, you will have 2 minutes whenever you're ready. Is that it? Okay. All right, Chase, you get the first rebuttal. Rebuttals will be 3 minutes, and you can start whenever you're ready, my friend.
Well, yes, it is technically true that transgender people are more autistic than people on the average. That does not make up the majority of transgender individuals. And not only that, you cannot contrast this with the vast extreme suicide rate that they are facing. It is approximately 150 times the attempts and like 4 more times the success, roughly. And this shows us that there is some clear underlying mental health problems. And in fact, the medical community until 10 years ago agreed that this was a mental health disorder that was similar to depression. It was only declassified that way because of wokeism. So this shows us that 10 years ago we would have actually had justification to ban transgender individuals. And sorry. Yes. So this shows that we would have had some justification, and not only that, but the variables in autism don't necessarily equal transgender. Like, yes, it becomes more likely, but it is not. It is not it is not the only factor. Transgenderism, it can develop from many things. For example, a big one is sexual abuse as a child. We've seen studies that have shown this. So clearly, when you have such trauma as a person, you cannot be in the competent state of mind to be able to own a firearm. Not only this, but we also have precedent for banning people with mental health issues from firearms. There's been many laws passed and upheld by the Supreme Court. So I understand the position of you give the government an inch, you take a mile. But at the same time, there are some restrictions that the government needs to do, and that is just a fact of life. Thank you.
Okay. All right. You only used up about a minute and a half. So once again, you left plenty of time. Anthony, you'll have 3 minutes whenever you're ready. Okay. Well, once again, plenty of time left. You had about a minute and a half left. Chase, is your turn. 3 minutes whenever you're ready. I would like to point out that the constitutionality has not been touched upon much. Just pointing that out. Chase, whenever you're ready, start.
Okay, yeah. So to touch upon the first of Anthony's points, yes, they have a higher bullying rate, and that is a problem. And yes, in a perfect world, they would be able to defend themselves. But the thing is, we don't allow people with schizophrenia to defend themselves with a firearm. There are certain conditions that are inherently disqualifying. No matter how much you try to sugarcoat it, they are inherently disqualifying. Depression would be inherently disqualifying. And there is a lot of Supreme Court precedent to this upholding that these laws are indeed constitutional. The courts have upheld that if adjudicated that a condition is makes you mentally deficient to own a firearm, it is perfectly permissible under the Second Amendment to make an exemption for you not to be able to own one. So there is clear Supreme Court precedent for this. This is not a new topic at all. And not to mention, there is not to go back to the point of transgender and autism. The correlation is not really as heavy as you would think. Like, yes, there is a higher correlation, but it's not to the vast extent of, like, it's not like 50% trans people are autistic. So, like, I think that there is a variable there, but it's not the only variable. So I think a big, broader role is trauma. And I've obviously sympathized with transgender people. Like, I love them. But I don't necessarily know if I trust every trans person with a firearm. As we've seen in the recent Minnesota school shooting, the recent Presbyterian school shooting in Tennessee, and there's been many more examples of either of transgender shooters shooting up schools and murdering children, specifically Christian children. And frankly, that is unacceptable, and there needs to be a solution to this problem. And I think that is the solution, because if you're in a medical condition that is inherently debilitating, which I believe transgenderism can be inherently debilitating, then I think you should inherently be disqualified for the safety of yourself and everyone around you. Thank you.
Okay. Anthony, you know the drill. Whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer. All right, Chase, you know the rule. Whenever you're ready. Chase, you ready?
Sorry about that. We're having a bit of a glitch, but yeah, so anyway, going back to the point, like, yes, I do think in an ideal world, transgender individuals should be able to protect themselves. That should be the basic standard we have as Americans. I agree with that. And I fully sympathize with that position. But I just think, unfortunately, it's not the world we live in. Because transgender people are at a greater risk of suicide, which, yes, the majority of that is not done by firearms. And then to go back to another point, we've seen an increased radicalization among the trans community in server and online chat rooms like Discord, for example. This shows us that these people are clearly getting mentally brainwashed, and it's at a very concerningly high scale. And so, in order to solve this, the only solution is a gun ban. And does that mean the gun ban has to last forever? No. But they can also get over their mental health condition or their inherent underlying mental health conditions that cause this. and then their gun rights can be restored, just like in every other position. And to go back to the point of legal definitions, well, Anthony, you stated that yes, legal definitions aren't everything. Which yes, I agree, legal definitions aren't everything. But for the purpose of this debate, the legal definition is the one that matters. Thank you.
Chase, you know the drill. You don't even have to wait for me to unmute. Just start whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah, I understand you're using the statistic of like male. And yes, a lot of these mass shooters are actually men who identify as women. That is true. So we see this, but we see this is not just limited to the transgender community. We see this with a lot of mental health problems, uh, such as de- such as depression and some other conditions that go that way. But I think to go back to the root of the problem, it is that these people are committing mass shootings. And yes, maybe not at a massively high rate, but 5 is still an extreme amount. And I think that we need to be really careful about this, because when we look at the actual statistics, the transgender community, yes, they've only made up approximately 3% of mass shootings, roughly. But that is also true. But that is also true. That's more proportionate to their population, which is about 1%. So I think definitely shows a correlation, not exactly a causation, but a correlation between transgender individuals and firearm violence. And yes, the majority of firearm deaths are gun violence, and we can acknowledge that. But we also can acknowledge that the transgender community has made up a lot of the high profile and very deadly mass shootings. For example, we need to be really careful when looking at we need to go down to the human level of these people. They obviously have severe mental health issues, most of them. So I think that we need to be very precise when we look at them, because I think that when we go too broad, yes, I agree. In a general sense, in an ideal world, transgender people should not be banned from owning firearms. We don't live in that ideal world. We live in the world where they have severe mental health problems, and the only way to get around it is to ban firearm rights. Now, now we need now we need to just look at it very carefully and understand this, because yes, the trans community is a very small community, but a lot of the high profile mass shootings have been done by them. So I think that we need to take that into account. Thank you. But yeah, I will agree with you that we do see that we do see a relatively low risk, but we see that the community that the mental health risk in that community is growing, and it is not growing at a small rate. This community is growing at a vast rate, and we see that especially with these online platforms like Discord radicalizing these people, we see an issue here, and we see a severe issue because the transgender mass shootings will only go up. They're not going to go down. All the studies say this. Transgenderism is objectively a mental illness, and it needs to be treated as such. Because when we start treating it as, well, it's the same as being gay. It's literally not, because it was a diagnosed mental health condition under the DSM-5 until approximately 10 years ago, and we see this, and yes, and like I said, correlation, and the correlation is important. It's important to look at patterns. Patterns are not the only thing we need to look at, but that is a very important factor in this debate, and we see the patterns of these people going up. We see problems in this community that we didn't previously see, and so I think we need to take that into account and look at that when we're asking, like, can we do this? The answer is yes. We've done this in the past, and it has had mixed results. But at this point, it is the only option that we have. So therefore, we need to exercise the options that we have currently. Thank you. Well, yes, discrimination is illegal. This is not necessarily a discriminatory act. It is rather an act of safety. It is an act, and yes, I will agree with you. It is the psychologist's problem. That's why I said we need reform. And I'm not saying this transgender gun ban should last forever. I'm just saying that considering the vastly high suicide rates in this community, to the point where it's an extreme level, it needs to be looked at, and we need to look at correlation and causation, and we need to look at how we can best address this. And I think a gun ban is the only way to address this at this point, because we have no other options. We tried coddling these people, and it doesn't work. So I think that when you really look at it, when you look at the actual numbers, it shows. It shows, and this number is only going up. And discrimination is inherently bad, but this is not inherently a discriminatory act. It is rather an act. It is rather an act of their safety and others' safety. And I think that we need to look at others' safety, not just theirs. And yes, their rights are very important. But I think that when we exclude other people, like depression, for example, then we clearly see that this is in the same vein that this is in the same vein. And yes, so yeah, I think that I think that it is inherently a psychologist problem, but until we can address that psychologist problem, this is the only solution. Thank you. Yes, I think that taking away rights is a last resort, but it is quite frankly the only resort we have right now. And yeah, and so by that logic, you would say discriminating against people with other mental health issues such as depression, because they cannot own guns, at least not very easily. It takes a lot of paperwork. It should be the same for transgender people because they have a similar mental health condition to depression, and this shows. And their suicide rate, yes, they will find something else to do it with. And knives are done, but also knives are much more beatable than a gun. Because a gun you can't take away. A gun is kind of like once they have one, you're kind of just dead. Whereas a knife, you can wrestle away from someone. You can actually have a basis of defense, especially when the good guy has a gun and the bad person does not have a gun. This makes things inherently good that we need to take it away. And so I think that the ends justify the means in this scenario. And yeah, I will. So yeah, I think that taking away gun rights should be a last resort, but it is the only resort we have. And quite frankly, that is all I kind of have for this debate. That's all my notes and stuff. Thank you. I don't know about you, Anthony, but I think I'm ready to move into like the questions phase of this debate. Okay. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Anyone has any questions for both or just one of them? You can ask. First, I kind of want to ask one thing to you, Chase. So you claimed at one point that it's an act of public safety, so it must be done because trans people are more likely to commit mass shootings. Okay. Then you also claim that it's an act of their safety because they're more likely to commit suicides. So here's the issue with that. By that exact same logic, we should ban firearms from both white people and black people because black people commit mass shootings at astronomically high rates, whereas white men specifically, are committing suicides at astronomically high rates. 30% of the population makes up 70% of all the suicides. So the issue is that you're essentially saying because this demographic is overrepresented, we should take away their rights. How do you get around that? That doesn't really make sense.
Well, I'm looking at it from a public safety standpoint and from their safety as well. I think it is important that the safety of the public is fundamentally the most important right Americans have. And so I think that this is a measure of safety that would fix a lot of the problems because we see that this transgender radicalization is increasing at an astronomical rate.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of pointing out. I don't really know if I have any question for you, Anthony. I actually put in the notes. I think some of the statistics you were using were somewhat somewhat misleading, because I think some of them were including gang violence. That last one you just cited probably wasn't, because I'm sure it would have been the percentage of white people committing mass shootings, because you said it goes back to the 60s, so that one probably isn't including gang violence. But some of the statistics you were using, like when you said that only 0.1% of all mass shooters were trans since 2013, well, that stat can't be true unless you're including gang violence, because that would mean only 1 out of every 1,000 mass shooters were trans, and we've not had anywhere near 1,000 mass shootings in the last 12 years if you're not including gang violence. In fact, we only have between like 5 to 15 mass shootings per year if you don't include gang violence. Yeah. But at the end of the day, though, I did see the point you're making. That's kind of all the questions I had to ask. If anyone else has anything they want to ask, ask away. I don't really think I got much of an answer to the question that I asked, though, to Chase. I didn't really get much of an answer to it, but yeah.
I would say
Aaron,
constitutional Jesus has plenty of questions. So let's start with the primary question here, because you seem to have throughout the debate stood on the consistent stance of it being a primary concern of public safety. The question becomes, though, what is the actual constitutional basis for quote-unquote public safety? Because if we're operating under the standpoint of public safety ultimately comes down to a subjective morality standpoint. So how are you able to equate, oh, well, this is just about public safety to constitutional authority?
Well, I generally just don't believe in subjective morality, if that makes sense. So I honestly don't really have a good answer for you.
So then the entire basis for your debate completely falls flat then at that point. If you're not able to sit there and actually justify and equate public safety down to constitutional authority, then there was no point in you having this debate at all. And your entire argument falls flat in terms of determining that removing firearms from transgender people is constitutional, especially given the fact that you also made the claim that you made the claim that there are a rising number of transgender people becoming radicalized, and pointing out the fact that there's somehow an overrepresentation, despite the fact that according to not only FBI but also DHS, multiple different police accounts, so on and so forth, that transgender and non-binary people account for less than 1% of mass shootings within the last decade. This includes specifically anywhere between 1 and 8, depending upon the data set and definition used, of actual individual cases, meaning at best there's been 8 individual cases, at worst there's been only 1 individual case of a transgender mass shooter, which makes it statistically invalid to be able to draw conclusions about any level of I wouldn't even say overrepresentation, but representation at all. Especially because you can actually see statistical data sets that show the reverse, showing specifically that actually people who are transgender and non-binary are actually disproportionately victims of mass shootings in relation to actual data set numbers, according to the FBI, CIA, DHS, various different police department statistics and data analyses, including the 2017 and 2021 fatal gun violence report, specifically showing that there was actually a rise in gun violence against trans people. Also showing UCLA Williams Institute, specifically showing that transgender people experienced a violent victimization rate of 93.7 per 1,000 people, compared to 21.1 per 1,000 for non-LGBTQ individuals. Then, of course, you can look at the study Every Town for Gun Safety, which was specifically a gun safety activist group. They reported that between 2017 and 2023, guns were used in 73% of homicides of transgender people. And in 2023 specifically, that number was actually 80%. Then, of course, you can also look at DHS and FBI statistics showing that Black transgender women are particularly affected, accounting for more than 60% of all trans and gender expansive fatal violence victims since 2013.
How much of that is domestic violence between them and their partners? Because they are more likely to be abused.
So this isn't. It doesn't mention domestic violence. It just shows homicide rates
How much is
and
how
mass
much
shootings.
of that is like a genuine hate crime where somebody goes up and attacks them? And I'm guessing upwards of 80% is just their partner attacking them.
Well,
Well,
the data set doesn't. The data set doesn't distinguish
Here, I
between
want to
a
actually
hate
interject.
crime.
I want to interject real quick because we need to get back to the two debaters real quick. But I will actually say though that your point is sound either way because you did go down some tangent there and you brought up a whole host of statistics. I don't know the exact methodology and modality of everything you brought up, but I would like to clarify that it is pretty evident that what you displayed though shows that there's not any logical basis for banning trans folks to own firearms based off overrepresentation. So that's just the whole crux of what you were saying, and there's not really any denying that. So Chase,
Also, it was also pointing out the fact that Chase was unable to actually prove a foundation in his claim that there was any level of constitutional authority when it came down to banning the right to own firearms, the right to bear arms, removing the Second Amendment from American citizens who are transgender. Instead, it came down to his own subjective opinion of morality and public safety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what. Yeah. That's my whole issue is that I feel like the constitutionality part. It came up a few times. Anthony, you definitely gave some constitutional claims, no doubt. But Chase, I think this is a good time for you to just say, what is your constitutional basis for prohibiting firearm ownership for trans individuals? Like, truly, what is your constitutional basis for that? Because you didn't articulate much of one, if one at all, during the debate.
Well, I would say my constitutional basis is the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled that general restrictions can be done in the cases of mental health disorders, in the case of a diagnosed mental health disorders. That I would say that's basically what my point rests on.
If you're referring to the red flag laws court case, that was specifically in reference to individual safety, not public safety.
Yeah, what exact case are you, or SCOTUS case are you referring to? I was wondering that too because I did hear you say the Supreme Court ruled such a way, but you never actually cited the case. What case is it? If you have to look up and find it, that's fine. But
I don't remember
I could just give it to you.
I remember. I just don't remember the exact case name. That's the problem.
It's United States v. Rahimi in 2024. It had nothing to do with quote unquote public safety. It specifically was a Supreme Court case in which Rahimi sued the United States because he was under a domestic violence restraining order, and the court upheld a federal law that prohibited individuals under domestic violence restraining orders from owning firearms during the time in which the investigation is actively ongoing. He petitioned the court saying that his Second Amendment was being violated. The Supreme Court then turned around and ruled upon it, saying that for the purposes of individual safety in an active investigation, it is okay to have rights temporarily deprived, just as you typically see in any other active investigation, especially when one is incarcerated pending investigation or pending trial.
Yeah. So yeah, Chase, what's your response to that?
I would say that the Supreme Court has touched on this in a couple of cases, but not in a direct sense. So that would again have to be adjudicated. But like for example, in 1975, there was a case O'Connor v. Donaldson, and the Supreme Court ruled that the removal of rights for people with mental health issues could be done in the case that it was extreme. For example. But that specific case touched on people that have been committed, but that doesn't generally happen anymore. So I think
not what O'Connor. I'm sorry, but that was not what O'Connor v. Donaldson was. So in O'Connor v. Donaldson, the Supreme Court specifically ruled that a state cannot constitutionally confine a non-dangerous person who's capable of surviving safely in freedom, even if the person is mentally ill. So I don't mean to interrupt, but it sounds to me like you realize that your argument is completely unfounded, and now you're grasping at straws, thinking that somebody's not going to understand these cases. And O'Connor v. Donaldson, you just blatantly lied about what O'Connor v. Donaldson was. O'Connor v. Donaldson was actually specifically where he was saying that he was illegally confined and had his rights deprived of him due to a mental illness. He then turned around and he's gone.
He actually just left over that. Dude, if he leaves the server over, I'm gonna lose my mind.
I hate to be that guy, but like you're not gonna fucking lie. Like it's okay to admit that like you thought
No,
something
he had
was
no. I'm
wrong.
gonna be honest. Listen. I actually thought, Anthony, I'll say this now. The start of that debate, Anthony, you really struggled. You were not articulating your point well at all in the beginning. You then really sped it up once you started talking constitutionality. Once you started basically trying to compare, how you can't say correlation equals causation, which is essentially what he was saying. You can't blame an entire demographic because of overrepresentation, which, by the way, he didn't even have any evidence for overrepresentation to begin with. But the whole issue, though, is that at the end of the day, as the debate played out, you had a genuine logical argument. He did not have one. He did not have a logical argument. He did not have any basis for his claim, and that was something we were giving him a chance to explain his basis, but he didn't explain such, and we gave him a whole host of chances right there.
This is also part of the reason why I waited so long to come into the debate, because I would not have had the patience. Like, this is why, despite the many times that Chase has asked to debate me on certain topics, I refuse to debate him. Because, like I had messaged you, I was like, if I'd have been the one fucking debating him instead of Anthony, I would have creamed him in the first